Right, good morning. My name is Glen, and today I'm ably assisted by Felix, who is my partner in our collaboration called Springboard to the Future. And we specialize in helping organizations move to a sustainable and successful hybrid working model to give them a platform for their future. And we're here to talk about how to escape the HR straitjacket. Now, the first question, obviously, is what is the HR straitjacket? It's a bit of a clickbait title, absolutely, we admit that. However, before we get started, this is not a hatchet job on HR at all. HR have done a huge job in really challenging circumstances over the last couple of years. They had to work very fast and deal with a lot of issues in a very short amount of time. So absolutely, we're not putting the boot in. However, on the other side, we know that HR very much operate in a world of policies, rules and legislation because they have to hold employers to account, make sure they're treating their employees fairly, and also looking after retention, talent, recruitment, as well as redundancies, business change, reorganizations. And all of that influence does mean that they do like a good policy. And what we're going to do is start off with an example of that. So here we have a quote on screen from a guy called Chris O'Shea, who's the CEO of Centrica, and he was interviewed by a number of newspapers in February of this year. And he said that he had been told by his chief people officer that they had insisted that if he was to offer flexible working to his staff, he would have to do it too, and leading by example. And rather than pulling rank, he had acquiesced. Is that the right solution for his organization? Does his particular job mean that really he should have been in the office 5 days a week? I would argue that that is a very classic case of the tail wagging the dog. So why does the straitjacket exist? I think if we go back to the beginning of the pandemic, there was a huge amount of change happened. The leadership of organizations was focused on survival. How do we get the organization working and productive again when people can't come to the office? A huge amount of change happened. There were laptops in the post, there was office furniture flying about, people were getting set up on their kitchen tables, which was great. It absolutely meant that organizations can start to function in a different way. They transitioned into the new normal and actually made it work. In a lot of cases, have been very productive since. And HR were under pressure. They had to ensure that as best they could, they were keeping people safe. They had to deal with a lot of change and still look after recruitment, retention, and all the other stuff that HR have to do. But the snag is now, we've been working remotely for more than 2 years. And the leadership of the organizations have actually abdicated their responsibilities for working patterns in favor of HR policies. They've taken the attitude that once we've got a policy, we're safe. And the snag is that it means that hybrid working in many cases, like the Centrica example, has become an HR-driven model. It's not about productivity. So why do you need to escape the HR straitjacket? It's all about being proactive rather than reactive. If we go back to 2 years ago again, people were reacting to what was happening in the news, our external circumstances, we need to get stuff working. Whereas now it's a case of how do we shift that perspective from beyond the end of your nose now to what does the organization look like in the next 3, 6, 9 months, even 2 years away. So being proactive about what we want to achieve and how we're going to achieve it. Going back to Centrica again, one size does not fit all. It may well be that the CEO should be in the office 5 days a week, but other people might be in the office 2 days a month. The key thing is if you're going to mandate 3 days a week, it is highly likely that will not suit the majority of the workforce. So therefore, the leadership needs to step up and start thinking about how they want the organization to work. So you've got the people side of things, culture, leadership, and flexibility are the key components. But what about the other things that are important in this? Technology, estates, infrastructure, organizational change. It's only at the very top of the organization where all these things come together and you've got to get an overarching view of what's going on. So therefore, if you allow the conversation to be dominated by policies from HR, then you'll never have a constructive conversation about what are the most appropriate hybrid models that may be more suitable and more productive for your organization, your teams, your people, your customers. I've got another example here, and for obvious reasons, I can't name the company. So the preamble to this is, I was told, our office has been doing 2 days a week since January. Our CEO very publicly told staff, if you don't like doing 2 days a week in the office, you need to look for a job elsewhere. As you can see from the quote, we're losing great employees to competitors as our industry is now largely remote. And we are now just stuck with the poor to average employees in the main who are just grateful to have a job. Unsurprisingly, Q1 results are in and have slumped considerably. A great example of a one-size-fits-all that is not suitable for a particular audience. So what? Why is this important? Put bluntly, this is a complete change to the way an organization works. And that means this level of change is far too broad just to be the preserve of HR alone. And as I said at the beginning, it's a case of the tail wagging the dog. Ownership of what happens in the organization must lie with the CEO and the leadership. And this also applies to hybrid working. Absolutely, HR have a massive role to play to get it to work, but they shouldn't be leading it. I'm now going to hand you over to Felix, who will look at how you dig your estate tunnel from this particular straitjacket.
Thanks, Glenn. I now want to talk about the subject of flexibility and what it means to you. And this is a difficult topic which businesses have struggled with in this first quarter of the 21st century. Now, many individuals, including working mothers and single parents, want more flexibility, while many managers want their teams in the room with them, where they can see them, where they can task them, where they can mentor them. But this is a slightly back to the factory mentality, I think. A centralized model does make many tasks easier without doubt, and does confer the status on managers because you've got your people there to manage. But it also lowers the levels of trust and autonomy with a commensurate reduction in productivity. So flexibility is at the heart of hybrid working, and what flexibility means to you and what it means to your team is absolutely central to that. So you need to think of flexibility as a three-dimensional puzzle. It's a question of when you work, the degree of synchronization of work, whether you work set hours or any time you like. It's a question of where you work. Do you use a central location, or can you work anywhere you like? And it's not just a question of working from home. You could be in the south of France, maybe working quite happily. This questions the role of the office and the requirements for availability. And there's how you work. Are you an input-focused organization where people turn up and do their hours and disappear? Or are you an output-focused organization? Is it what people deliver that really matters? And this emphasizes the need for a clear purpose, targets and goals, and you to be quite clear about what you want your people to do. Now, I would argue that organizations' default setting should be towards greater flexibility, as this maximizes autonomy, boosts motivation and increases input, with the reality shaped by the needs of the task, the leadership, the organization and the individuals. So I want to just illustrate this really with evidence from my own career. So this is what we call our flexibility matrix, and it's very simple: when, where and how. And you've got highly centralized on one side, or highly controlled on one side and highly uncontrolled on the other side. And then at the bottom, we've got a line on autonomy, which indicates how much autonomy teams have or individuals have, depending upon how you want to interpret it. And it's really just an aggregate of the three factors above it. So if I started my career, when I was in the military, I ran a highly centralized organization for many reasons. But one of the reasons was because that's how I had been brought up to do it, and I never questioned the status quo. When I moved into the world of crisis response, we moved into an organization that had teams running on different models. So we had the central office in London, and they worked to the London market. They worked London hours. They were 9 to 5 with a bit of flex either end for the out of town people, and that was how they worked. And then I was in a deployed team, so our job was to focus on what the client needed, and our work routine was entirely different. We could work when we liked, how we liked, and where we liked. And on one job, when I found it necessary to go and work on the Isle of Samos, no one batted an eyelid. It was all perfectly acceptable because that was it. And now I work in the consultancy role with Glen, and we are entirely sort of on the right-hand side, pretty much scoring, not necessarily 10s, but certainly 9s. And we have a framework that we operate in. We do have limitations, but in essence, we are highly autonomous, both of us. And of course, in order to take advantage of the flexibility, you have to have the trust in people, and that comes down to how you develop your team, their confidence, and the confidence you have that they will do what needs to be done. So the question then to people watching this is, where do you sit? Is there a difference between where you would like to sit personally and where your team would sit, or where your organization sits? So are we sort of different? Are we trying to straitjacket everyone into a one-size-fits-all model, or is there this flexibility within your organization to work out what works best for particular teams? And if you say we can't achieve this because I don't trust my team, then maybe the next question is, okay, so what is it we don't trust, and how can we fix that? And how do we approach that? So I want people to think about flexibility as to come at flexibility from the most flexible position. People want to be flexible, so start at 10 and then reduce, rather than starting at 1 and increasing, which is what we tend to do at the moment. Okay, how do we get there? This is the big question, really. I mean, by there, we mean a stable, sustainable hybrid model that meets the needs of the task, the leadership, the organization, and the individual. And it has to balance all those four. It should aim to keep the majority of people happy for the majority of the time. You're never going to please everyone all the time, but the majority for the majority is how we want to go about it. And the problem that we have is that people at the moment are tending to fall into hybrid, or they're just following the trend of saying, well, we'll work 2 days a week in the office, or 3 days in the week at the office, because that's what sort of feels right, and that's what everyone else is doing. And by falling into hybrid, you tend to get maybe the worst of all possible worlds, what we term the horrible hybrid, and that may prevent you unlocking the real benefits of hybrid working. So the successful model requires the alignment of purpose, people, process, and practice in a supportive environment comprising both the cultural and physical aspects. And this is not just a change of hours, location, or IT, but an intentional cultural change driven by the leadership. So building better hybrid, or building a proper hybrid model, is a cultural change exercise, one that needs to be led by the senior leadership, by the CEO, by the MD, by the head of operations, whoever it is, by the owner, And this is not just an issue that is to be palmed off on HR. It's too broad, far too far-reaching for that. And you'll notice that as we've gone through this, we keep talking about leadership, teamwork, trust, delegation, autonomy, all of which help form the culture of the organization. Next slide, thanks. So how we actually get there is not rocket science, and there's loads of books written on culture, how you achieve cultural change and change processes within organizations. But we've simplified it into our D4 process. And the D4 process starts off with discovery. And this is the bit that is almost invariably forgotten about or left out or skipped because it takes a bit of time to do. But the discovery recognizes that you are creating something new. You're not just amending something, you're not just developing something, you're creating something new. And it discovers the needs of the organization right across the board to get you on the right page. And in doing that, you start to build trust across the organization. You know, this gets left behind. And what this does is gets everyone's thoughts together and creates a sense of engagement and a sense of involvement and brings newer, wider, more diverse thinking to the organization than perhaps you've had. Really important, gets forgotten, needs to be done. Once you've done that, you're in a position to understand what the requirement is. And then you can start to develop the right model for your organization. And this is where the heavy lifting involving HR, IT, infrastructure that develops the ways and means, processes and procedures, and importantly, the expectations and behaviors. And then once you've got your model, you deploy it. And I'm not going to talk about that in length because that's an art in itself. But once it's out there, you have to deep seek the change to make them stick. Changes, as we know, sometimes are not that sticky, and we'd like to revert back to maybe what we're comfortable with. And this requires the ongoing need for mentoring, development, support, which also gets left behind, and people forget about it. People think because they've made the change, it will just happen. Almost invariably, you need a high-level champion in the organization. You need full engagement of the leadership, and you need a project conscience to keep it straight. And the project conscience is something that we can talk about at a later stage if that's of interest to people. So that's how you get it done. It's not difficult, but it is time consuming and requires a certain amount of input and application to get it done. Glen.
So what are your thoughts? To summarize, there are 4 key things that we need to take away. Firstly, hybrid working is not going to go away anytime soon. But its implementation isn't as easy as it looks, and it's not just an HR issue. It's got to be led by the leadership. Secondly, it's a proper business change program. It needs to be run like it. It needs to have a plan. It needs to have deliverables. It needs to be controlled. It needs to be kept on track. And then after it's been delivered, it needs to be monitored to make sure it's working. And if it isn't, change it. Thirdly, as I've said, one size doesn't fit all. Keeping the majority of people happy for the majority of the time has got to be the aim. And that might mean a mix of working patterns, but if that's what's needed in the organization, be brave, go for it. Fourthly, as with any change program and as with leadership and getting an organization to do anything, communications are the bedrock, both up and down the organization, because without communication, nothing happens. So over to you. What are your thoughts?
So Glen, we've had a couple of questions come in, as usual, very, very challenging ones. First one is a nice one. How do you develop your people in a hybrid environment? I mean, that's something that we're very conscious of. So what are your thoughts on that?
Developing people is really difficult. From particularly when people are working remotely. The snag is it's a proactive thing to ask a stupid question. If you've got to sit there on Teams or sit there on Slack or pick up the phone to somebody, you've actually either got to schedule some time with them, or you're putting something into writing. There's a record of your lack of knowledge, which is really, really hard for some people to do. And the ability to swivel round in the office and just say, hello, how do we do this, this, and this, please? Or where do I need to go to find ABC is a really key thing. Also, when people are working remotely, they don't learn by osmosis. They don't listen to what's going on in the office. They don't see what's happening and how people behave towards each other. So actually, it means that they don't get the feeling of how do we do things around here in quite the same way. Which means actually they do, when people arrive in the organization, be they apprentices, graduate trainees, or new recruits into the organization, spending time with their teammates, wherever that happens to be, is actually really, really important. Now, having had a chat to a few organizations, the most successful solution I've heard to this is actually saying to new joiners they will be working pretty much full time in the office for the first 3 to 6 months. And what they do is they rota other team members to be in during that time, and obviously when all the teams are in to do their planning and the team building and the important meetings, they'll be there as well. But the key thing is giving people easy access to that support network, allowing them to build those relationships, because it's fundamentally in all organizations, it's a relationships that allows you to get stuff done and make progress. So if you don't make them, you're really up against it. And I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of people I've seen in the press recently saying, yay, we're going back to the office. It's been great socially. Yes, that's important, but the focus needs to shift from being purely social now into also getting stuff done and using the time there wisely. And training new joiners and developing people is one of those really important things that needs to be done face to face.
I think interestingly, having a flexible approach in the office actually helps you on this, because it enables you to, it creates a culture where people become naturally flexible, and it enables you to sort of veer and haul to get the right people in at the right time to make this sort of mentoring piece work. So I think that's good.
There are going to be people that struggle with it though, and I'm thinking back the offices I've worked in when people have had big decorations and their family photos and their pot plants sat next to their monitor and that kind of stuff. This idea of flexible working and never having a desk that you call home potentially, I think is going to be quite discombobulating for some people, and this comes back to the cultural shift that's required in the fact that it is going to feel more turbulent to operate there until you get used to it. And I'm willing to bet, like people sitting in the same seat on the same train every morning, we will get to a stage where people will turn up on a Wednesday or a Thursday and they will occupy the same desk. It won't necessarily be as personalized as they had before, but it's one of those things offices are going to change, I think.
Well, that ties in with another question we've had here that says, doesn't flexibility just create chaos?
Yeah, that, and I think from the outside it could very well look like chaos. But this is, I think it's important in terms of if we step above that and say, okay, we've got a set of output that we need to achieve within a team, within an organization. How best are we going to achieve that with our people, and where best do they need to be to achieve that? It means that provided at the leadership level there is an understanding of what needs to be delivered, and then down at the team leadership level there's an understanding of who's going to do what, when, and where they're going to be, there's no reason why it shouldn't work. The key thing is coming back to trust, holding people to account, making sure that they do what they say they're going to do and when they said they were going to do it. But does location matter? Arguably not much, but yes, it could look very, very chaotic, and it's going to take a while for people to get used to the fact that they're going to have to pick up the phone more. They're going to have to use the chat apps or whatever it is to keep things moving along. We're going to have to rely on different methods of motivating teams rather than just walking around, as I used to do, management by walking about. Going to see people to get stuff done is not necessarily going to be as practical because people are not going to be there. potentially. So it's going to be a case of, right, let's be proactive about this and keep communication lines open using different methods.
Yeah, I would agree with you. My take on this is that there is flexibility and there is anarchy, and you can be flexible, and you can have, you know, we know organisations that are fully flexible, working way across in the 9s and 10s on the matrix, and they're highly efficient, highly functional, because they're very output based, and how they manage the output and show it, and you know, hold people to account against it is brilliant. I would say you have to have a structure, some sort of structure. So you can't have no structure. You have to have some sort of structure, and that structure will come out of the way you develop the model, and that binds the organization together and makes it work. So you can't have anarchy. You can have flexibility without anarchy, provided you have a structure in place to support it.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think the important thing is also choosing the right model for the kind of job you're doing. And I'll use Dyson as an example of that. James Dyson has been very vociferous in the press about getting people back to the office. And he's been more draconian actually than even Apple, which is quite amusing. But actually, faced with the kind of challenges he's facing in terms of getting multidisciplinary engineering teams together to design complex products and work out how they're going to be built, I can absolutely see the value of having people in the office an awful lot of the time. Because fundamentally, those people need to be having far more in-depth conversations and thinking through problems together to come to solutions. Where other organizations, such as, I don't know, we use an insurance company where fundamentally it's managing workflow of shuffling people around the organization, they can be far more flexible in terms of if you've got access to a PC, then potentially you can work from anywhere. So it's got to be horses for courses.
Yeah, I agree. Another little interesting one here. How do we, in this environment where everyone's got used to working from home and lots of youngsters want to continue working from home, how do you encourage people back into the office?
That's a really interesting one. In fact, I'm going to use my wife as an example here. She hates going into the office, not from the point of getting stuff done while she's there, but actually it's the hour and a half lost to her productive time in transiting to and fro the office. I think it's an interesting one. I don't think there's got to be a mixture of carrot and stick fundamentally, but the stick is really is interesting to look at. The carrot has got to be increasing collaboration. Unfortunately, I don't think we've sorted out who gets promoted yet. FaceTime is still important, unfortunately. It's not, people are not necessarily measured on the quality of their output, but as you move through an organization, your ability to influence the direction of the organization becomes more and more important. And unfortunately, the easiest way to influence people is to actually see them face to face. And I don't think that will change in the near future. So I think there's an element of fear of missing out. But on the other hand, I think we've also got to make sure that people who are remote are not forgotten. So it's a case of using the time in the office wisely. If you're sat there doing email and writing reports, you're probably doing it wrong. Use the time there constructively, building relationships. And that's the way to attract people back. Is making sure that the time in the office is beneficial, they can see value to it, and that they get something out of it. So it's all about making the environment welcoming, potentially being flexible about hours, so they don't have to travel in the rush hour as it currently stands. And the facilities are set up so when they first arrive back at their desk, it doesn't take 3 hours for their laptop to download all the updates and get hooked up to the corporate systems again. Make things easy and people will come back. They'll come back to do what they need to do in the office. They won't be coming back full time, I don't believe.
Yeah, I think you've picked up, I mean, for me, people will go to the office because they see value in doing it. If they're flogging, you know, an hour and a half to the office to just work like a drone, they're probably not going to enjoy it and probably not going to want to go back there. So I think, but if they feel there is value in it through being able to talk to people, socialize, network, develop creative ideas, all these really good stuff that come out of the office, then they will do it. The other thing I think is businesses now, organizations now need to create an environment where, again, to entice people back into the office. And this is about, what do you use the office space for? How's it configured? What do you want people to get out of it? And it's having that really long thing and moving away from the factory syndrome that have haunted offices. We should no longer be seeing the sort of the battery hens set up in offices where people just sit in rows and rows and rows, and we should be seeing something more intelligent than that to entice people back in, because the physical environment and the culture within the office is as important as being valued there and feeling it's worthwhile you going in. We've got one final question here, and this is a bit of a $100 billion question. Okay. Is hybrid the future?
Now that really is $100 billion question, to be honest. Zuckerberg's making an awful lot of money off the internet. If I think back, I first started downloading email over a phone line. I had so in year 2000, 2001, I had a team based in Bracknell. I was delivering for a customer in London. I worked for 1 or 2 days a week from a house in Taunton. So I've been working in what could be viewed as a hybrid or remote way for 20 years. And I've watched the technology change. We're now recording stuff on YouTube. We're sending Zooms. We've got Slack channels, mobile phones, video calling, etc., etc. I think the way we interact with people is changing as technology gets more adept. And as we go through into, people are starting to talk about the metaverse, augmented reality. I think the building blocks are coming together to see a sea change in how office work is done. Don't get me wrong. If your job is fixing cars or welding bodywork or moving stuff from A to B, then absolutely going to work is still going to be the only option, unfortunately. However, if your primary job is sat in front of a laptop, writing stuff, talking to people, organizing stuff, processing paperwork, I think we're starting to see a real change in the fact that there's a lot more strands of technology coming together. We're getting better bandwidth into people's houses, and these enablers, I think, will see a dramatic shift in the way work is done. We've used the terms on this video a few times about the factory mentality, going to work at 9, coming home at 5 or 6 in the evening, sitting there between set hours with an hour for lunch, and sat there rattling your keyboard in a cubicle farm. I think the movement away from that, the last 2 years have absolutely started it. Is hybrid as we currently see it the future? Probably not. Do I see it happening for the next 5 to 10 years whilst technology and the next big thing comes down track, whatever that looks like? Yes, I think it is. Yes, I think it is, because I think people are going to be reluctant to go back 5 days a week. Why should they? People have got used to integrating family and personal lives into their professional lives, which I think has benefits around the house as well as to mental health and physical health, the ability to go for a walk around the block and not bounce from meeting to meeting for 10 hours a day and then get in the car to go home. So I think the lifestyle changes and also the demonstrated maintenance of productivity whilst people are remote, I think are going to force change, and that's no bad thing. So I think, yes, near to mid-term, hybrid is the future. Beyond that, I think there's something else coming, but I don't know what it is yet.
I don't think, I'm not prepared to pretend I have a crystal ball, but I read this quote and I can't remember who quoted it, but it was she was a senior businesswoman who said, "The genie is out of the bottle. Workers have a taste for hybrid and remote working and are now demanding it." And I think that's interesting, and I think the benefits that will accrue from hybrid or remote working, or increasing the levels of hybrid or remote working, mean that it is here now and will develop. Whether it's the future, I don't know. Where I do agree with Glen that we're very much at the start of some considerable revolution, which we've been building up to with the digital, revolution. But now this will take us somewhere slightly different or considerably different, and I don't know where that is, and it may not even happen during my lifetime. But I think hybrid is important and will be here for the next 20 years. I'm pretty certain of that.
There's some really interesting experiments going on at the moment. So a couple of weeks ago, there was a news article about a law firm who said, right, okay, you can be permanently home-based at a cost of a 20% pay cut. That is a really interesting way of testing the market proposition. Are people prepared to necessarily take a cut in salary, or is the company risking not getting the best people anymore? Because they'll turn around and say, well, I want the money. Other organisations are offering me hybrid work, and I can keep 100% of my pay packet rather than 80%. The market will decide what happens in that space, but there is a lot of stuff going on which is really interesting. The results over the next couple of years are going to be fascinating.
Yeah, I think that's a great example which shows some of the sort of slightly confused thinking that's going on about how we develop this. And to my mind, that approach by that company reiterates why we say actually go back and do a full review of it, go through our 4D process and really work this one out, because I think they've got it wrong. I think they've got it wrong, and they'll probably pay a price for it at some stage. That's it.
Fantastic. I think we're done. So thank you very much for your time and attention. And yes, our contact details are on screen. If you do want to talk to us, we're always happy to have a conversation. Always happy to hear about people's experiences, because fundamentally we're all learning exactly the same as everybody else is about what makes this successful going forward.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
We're always delighted to hear from people.
We are.
Thank you.